notice that I did not make a video talking about the leaked Zelda casting. I did not spurg about it on YouTube. I did not release any statements. I did not talk about it at all because it was pretty transparently, obviously fake. And this really does need to be said. Like every time we hear these kind of stories about Nintendo, like, oh man, they're doing this, or they're changing this in localization, or they're not releasing this in the West. Like it's always completely and utterly fake. You know, we saw this earlier this year with like the Neptunia games. We saw this earlier with we saw this a couple years back with like Bayonetta 3 and the Mario movie. Like, you know, there's just so like and recently we had like you know, the Vivian thing. Like there have just been these huge, gigantic, like massive copes to try and gaslight you into thinking Nintendo is some like extreme woke activist company, you know, and it's been going on for a long time, you know. Like if anything, I think 10 years ago the big narrative was that Nintendo was going to be the first company to like cater to like SJWs and the woke crowd, when in reality they turned out to be the absolute last holdout, not just in gaming but in entertainment in general. So, you know, no company has their like should should have as much street cred as them. You know, their products stayed high quality. They kept producing like traditional games. They kept like, you know, doing what they do. You know, like Nintendo should have been like venerated as like this all time like goated company. You know, during the dark ages of like, you know, 2007 to 2012. You know, when like everybody was like trying to go like full tilt in on the woke agenda. You know, even today, you don't see people really acknowledge that games like Mass Effect or BioShock were woke. You know, it's not something people really address. Like to most people, woke culture just essentially amounts to complaining about like, I don't know, women not wanting to have sex with them online. You know, they don't really think about the wider perspective. You know, they don't really think about like what the problem actually is. And I've been emphasizing this a lot lately, but it really does need to be said is that like right now, woke culture is on the way out, right? It's not as popular as it used to be. People are like pushing back against it. And as a result of that, companies are starting to catch on and they are deliberately trying to market their films as being anti-woke. You know, like we've seen this a handful of times over the past couple of years. Hogwarts Legacy, I think, like really tried promoting itself online by leaning into like the transphobia thing from J.K. Rowling. Right. You know, there have been like a lot of observed instances of like people of marketers weaponizing anti woke sentiments to like promote their brand. We saw this with like Ghost of Tsushima actually. You know, just before they announced Ghost of Yokoi, they were like, you know, a big thing for them was like, oh man, Ghost of Tsushima. It's not like those other PlayStation exclusives. This is traditional and based in Japanese history, which by the way is not true at all. But you know, that's what they were telling people on certain communities online to try and promote the game and keep it relevant. You know, like that. Obviously it didn't work. You know, people like are already very unhappy with like the sequel of what they're doing with that thing, and like, you know, more and more people are becoming aware of what the original was actually like and all of that game's historical discrepancies. You know, there's so much, you know, you do need to like to know about games and gamer culture. Like it's amazing how fairly consistently Nintendo is the one that is accused of being some extremist woke corporation like that goes far beyond what anyone else in the industry is doing, when in reality like the opposite is true. And I don't think there's a better example of this phenomenon than the recent grift of like Hunter Schafer, of pretending this man would be playing Zelda in the new live action Zelda movie. Because this was like a rumor that everyone took as gospel. You know, everyone else other than Harmon Smith came out and started complaining about this, saying that this was something Nintendo would totally do, that this was confirmed, that this was a real thing. You know, you had people saying this like all this stuff, like trying to present this as if it was a real story. It's like it was like a Liam Robertson leak, honestly, where like, you know, it was pretty clearly false, you know, going by everything we knew about the brand and everything about what Nintendo's been doing lately. But like, uh, it was just a repeat of the Mario movie thing, right? Because we saw this when the Mario movie was coming out too, where like people tried making Girl Boss Peach into a thing, and like trying to say Mario would be like shafted in his own movie, and that Peach would be the real main character, which of course didn't happen. But even today, you still have like people like Angry Joe who try to meme that into being like a real valid criticism of the movie. In spite of like worshiping far more woke products like The Last of Us Part Two, there's like it's really interesting like seeing just how many people who were not fans, who were not following the situation at all, who don't know anything about Nintendo, were just bought this narrative, hook, line, and sinker, that this man would be playing Zelda. That was the mindset from the community. Like that was like what the anti woke grifters really latched onto. Like the Zelda movie is dead. Like it's just not gonna go anywhere. It's right out of the gate. And immediately, like I noticed this, and I haven't seen anybody else point this out, but like even big name Hollywood productions do not cast iconic female roles with like trans actors. Right? It's just not something that happens. Okay, like they want to make money, they can't alienate people. They know that like this is a big critical issue for like half the population. Like it's not something they will overtly do. And this is the problem with the anti-woke community, is that they're looking for things that aren't there. They keep it, they really act as if like this kind of mentality is like overt and it's like everywhere in media, when in reality it's like easily avoidable. And if they would try it, it would like immediately tank their brand, and that's kind of why I knew that this would not happen. Like if mainstream Hollywood productions aren't like getting away with gender flipping like iconic characters, no way Nintendo would allow them to do that with Zelda. And like people point to Marvel, but like as an example, as like a counterpoint. But what you have to understand about Marvel is that like a lot of those like female like gender flip versions of the characters like existed in the comics, and that's their justification for it, essentially, is that like well it's comic accurate, completely downplaying the fact that the comics themselves are low quality, that nobody likes them, and that like the alternate versions of the characters like aren't as iconic or recognizable as like their counterparts, right? And that's like that's the scam that's going on with comic book movies, and probably why like the industry wants to shield them so hard. But at the end of the day, like Zelda, there really should have been no like no concerns at all going into this about like Zelda's casting. Okay, none. That's my mentality. Like looking at this, seeing the situation play out, seeing how like where the rumors were coming from. Like, why did anybody at any point take this seriously at all? And the answer at its core really was to try and ruin the Zelda movie, because this is a movie that's following hot on the heels of the Mario movie, which is one of the most successful movies ever made. This is going to be like the biggest live action video game adaptation ever. It's going to like it's going to be way bigger than Lord of the Rings. To this day, people don't really like acknowledging that Zelda is a bigger brand than Lord of the Rings. That it has like endless room for potential and growth, while while Tolkien is kind of stuck in the past. Like Zelda is like a cultural phenomenon, and we've been consistently stuck in this weird rut because of like PlayStation, because of like the general public's hatred of Japanese culture and video games in general, Nintendo in general. Like people still to this day don't like acknowledging that Zelda is a cultural phenomenon. Just like they don't like acknowledging that Pokemon is a cultural phenomenon. Everyone just likes to pretend that this is some little thing that nobody cares about, when in reality it's like Pokemon is like bigger than everything. And Zelda is like a very interesting case of like a series that's consistently been considered like one of the all-time greats, and yet for some reason there's this weird counterculture of people who have been like religiously fighting for decades to try and prop up like other series that don't have anywhere near the same kind of longevity or relevancy. Like series like Ultima, series like Final Fantasy, the God of War games. Like it goes on and on, right? Like Zelda really should have been seen as like the major tentpole video game franchise, and it is in a sense. But because of situations like this, like weird bits of controversy that are completely and utterly fabricated, the brand has just like never been able to like be regarded as such in the mainstream. Like again, people would rather just read their dusty old Tolkien tomes instead of like moving on to the glorious new, like far superior Zelda franchise. And I do think that that's the big major takeaway when it comes to the Zelda movie. Like, I think this is very gonna be very self evident going into this. This is going to be a huge deal. The Zelda movie is going to be like the highest grossing fan. It is going to be an extremely successful fantasy movie, one of the most successful movies ever made, extremely successful film. Um, it is 100% going to do better than the Lord of the Rings films, and I think it will go down as being like far more culturally relevant and iconic. Lord of the Rings, the films are like some degenerate, broken, uninspired, just poor adaptations of like the books that completely like miss the point of what made them like impactful or like meaningful or deep. Like they were, it was just a complete butchering of the source material. Now people don't like admitting that because that flies in the face of the narrative that the films were some masterpieces, but like it does need to be said that like woke culture has been permeating like mainstream Hollywood films like that forever, right? And we are going to continue seeing that decline affect pretty much everything other than Nintendo products because Nintendo has cultivated a new generation of talent. These people are working on games now. Miyamoto has stepped aside. We're seeing younger people make games like Mario Kart World and Bonanza. And not only are these games as good as the stuff that came before, in a lot of ways they're better. And I do think that's like the major takeaway. Like looking at the Zelda movie and seeing these images and seeing like, how people are excited for it. Like this entire controversy was nothing more than a method of downplaying the Nintendo movie. Like, the industry is doing everything it possibly can to fight back against this film, make sure it fails, just like they tried to do with the Mario movie. And I really have to wonder, like, how long they can keep doing this before the general audience realizes what's up and figures out that The Legend of Zelda is not only one of the greatest video game franchises ever made, but a film franchise that far surpasses the likes of Lord of the Rings.